When you and I were in school, we used to just memorize 9 plus 6 equals 15. Not anymore. With the Common Core, students need to understand why that's the case, and Mrs. Ryan is here to explain.
Thank you. So our young learners might not be altogether comfortable thinking about what 9 plus 6 is. They are quite comfortable thinking about their friend 10. 10 is emphasized in our young grades as we're working in a base 10 system. So if we can partner 9 to a number and anchor 10, we can help our students see what 9 plus 6 is. So we're going to decompose our 6. And we know 6 is made up of parts. One of its parts is a 1. And the other part is a 5. We're now going to anchor our 9 to a 1, allowing our students to anchor to that 10. Now our students are seeing that we have 10 plus 5. Having now more comfort seeing that 10 plus 5 is 15. That's much more comfortable than looking at 9 plus 6, an isolated math fact.
I get it. I get it. I don't get it. It's completely baffling to me. And actually, I really hate the fact that I don't get it, because I wish I could understand it. I really do.
1 little, 2 little, 3 little fingers, 4 little, 5 little, 6 little fingers, 7 little, 8 little, 9 little fingers, 10 little fingers on our hands.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Denise PURSCHE, and I would like to welcome each and every one of you to Unveiling Common Core, the Unanswered Questions, which is hosted by the concerned parents and educators of the East Bay. Before we get started this evening, I first want to thank Calvary Temple Church, Pastor Steve Hunt, Faye Linton, as well as a whole host of others, including all the technical team. Nicole, thank you so much. And those who were here to set up the sanctuary with seating, and those who are running the lights and soundboard so that our evening will run smoothly. We also want to begin the evening by informing you that the forum will be filmed and aired on YouTube and other sites to continue to educate people on the issues of the Common Core State Standards Initiative. There are a couple of press people in the audience amongst us, and they may be audio recording our event as well. We also wanted to let you know that our evening is scheduled to run the full 2 hours with no intermission. There is bottled water out in the coolers outside in the lobby, and you will also find restrooms in the lobby area. Our goal this evening is to have a civil and educational discussion of the Common Core State Standards Initiative. There are many different people here with many different opinions regarding the Common Core. And while we welcome all of you, I would like to remind everyone that our children are not the platform for political agendas, and the forum tonight is not either. So that we can get the most out of this evening during the audience question time, we ask that you respectfully state your opinions and ask your questions so that the emphasis on the evening is on information gathering. We all desire to know more about the Common Core in order to make informed decisions. With this in mind, I would like to welcome and ask if there are any federal, state, or local representatives here in our audience in an official or unofficial capacity to please stand and introduce yourselves. To do this, please stand and remain standing until all the introductions are completed. So are there any federal, state, Department of Education employees in the room? Anybody from the Assembly, the California Senate, or school boards? All right, thank you so much for that. Next, I would like to introduce you to LIA Bush, one of the event organizers, who will introduce you to our panel. Leah?
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight and taking the time. I do this so often. And taking the time to learn about such an important topic that impacts us all, the Common Core State Standards Initiative. You may also know them as 21st century learning skills. As Denise said, my name is LIA Bush. I'm a parent of 2 elementary-age children in the Mount Diablo Unified School District. Common Core impacts our family every day. Before I introduce our panelists here tonight, I would like to draw your attention to the program you received as you came in. The program contains more detailed biographies, along with the schedule for tonight's forum. On the back of the program, you will find our contact information. We would love to hear from all of you. Our 4 panelists have donated their time to be here to educate us about Common Core. Dr. Sandra Stotsky is Professor Emerita at the University of Arkansas. She is credited with developing one of the country's strongest sets of academic standards for K through 12 students, as well as the strongest academic standards and licensure tests for prospective teachers, while serving as Senior Associate Commissioner in the Massachusetts Department of Education from 1999 to 2003. She has a new book to be released on March 9th, 2015, titled An Empty Curriculum: How Teacher Licensure Tests Lead to Empty Student Minds. Dr. Stotsky was the only English language arts subject matter expert on the Common Core Validation Committee. She did not sign off on the standards. Dr. James Milgram is Professor Emeritus of Mathematics at Stanford University and a former mathematician at NASA. He has given lectures around the world and has been a member of numerous boards and committees, including the National Board of Education Sciences, a body created by the Education Sciences Reform Act of 2002 to advise and consult with the Director of the Institute of Education Sciences on agency policies. Dr. Milgram was the only mathematical subject matter expert on the Common Core Validation Committee. He did not sign off on the standards. Kevin SNIDER is the Chief Counsel for the Pacific Justice Institute. He is admitted to both the California and Washington, D.C. bars. The legal department that Mr. SNIDER oversees at PJI works to defend religious freedom, parental rights, and other civil liberties. He will be speaking on the importance of asserting our rights as parents and citizens with respect to the Common Core. ELISE COOKE is a former technical instructor and software engineer for 2 different relational database management systems. She and her husband are parents of 3 children in high school and middle school. She will be offering a parent's perspective on student data collection. We begin tonight with Dr. Stotsky.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me also add that I was one of the chief consultants to California when it was developing its own English language arts standards in the early 90s. So I am very familiar with California's English language arts standards, and they and the old Massachusetts English language arts standards were considered among the best, if not the best, in the country. So it has been a double loss to have both California and Massachusetts go the Common Core way, so to speak. Let me begin my talk about the many issues I will cover. I will talk a little bit about the audiences that were excluded from the development of Common Core standards. I will talk about the validation committee on which I was a member from 2009 to 10. I will then talk specifically about the problems, flaws, missing standards in Common Core's English language arts standards, and then I will have a few words to offer on what I think might be some actionable steps for those of you that are interested in pursuing this complete transformation of American education in a direction that is clearly not benefiting most children. In fact, it's hard to know whether it could possibly benefit ultimately any of the children in this country. Let me begin first by talking about the audiences that were generally excluded from participation in the development of these standards. 4 major groups were not there. First, parents themselves were never involved in any of the 3 major groups or committees that were set up for the project. The Standards Development Group that met in the spring of 2009, and this was a group that was to come up with the so-called college readiness standards. Then there were the standards writers themselves, 3 for each of the subjects, and then there was the validation committee, the committee that was to supposedly ensure that these were sound, valid, reliable standards that had other qualities that I will mention. Parents were nowhere to be seen. Also, for the most part, nowhere to be seen were teachers, particularly high school math and English teachers. This was one of the most surprising omissions to me, because if you are thinking logically about college readiness standards, the 2 groups that you would expect to be there would be high school math and English teachers and college-level teaching faculty in those areas. If there are any groups that would be able to think about what should be taught and what could be taught, those are the 2 groups. And for the most part, they were simply absent. Never was a high school math teacher involved at any point in any of the 3 groups. On the validation committee, we finally had 1 high school English teacher, and she came about mainly because I kept complaining that we needed at least 1 high school English teacher to think about how valid these standards were at the high school level. 1 certainly isn't enough, but it was better than 0. So we have no parent input at the time that boards of ed are deciding to adopt these standards, anytime from February 2010 through the rest of the year. We have almost no involvement of teachers, so far as we know, from records and documents that are available for us to look at. This was a non-transparent process from the beginning. Third, state legislatures. State legislators, in particular, were not involved. Most of them had no idea what was going on, and the major reason I have been very much involved in testifying to state legislatures over the past 2 to 3 years is because state legislators have asked someone to explain to them what Common Core is and what's going on, because they knew absolutely nothing about it. Their own state boards didn't in no way communicated to them what was going on with reference to the costs that might be involved and what was going to happen to the school systems in the state. The 4th group that in almost every state that I've asked about had no knowledge of what was going on when the state boards of education, and for the most part, the decisions were made by state boards of education and commissioners of education, and in a few cases, a governor with them, all 3 or 2 of the 3. But the 4th group that was not involved at all were local school board members. They were not even given the courtesy of the kind of decision that state boards had made until after the fact. I was told that specifically in Massachusetts and have found that to be the case elsewhere as well. They had no idea that there was going to be another set of standards from Mars that would be imposed on the state with a test to follow based on the standards. They had no idea how many tests, what kind of test. It was simply a whole package that they did not know anything about. The Standards Development Committee completed its work by about the middle of the summer of 2009. At about that time, the grade level standards were to be developed, and the validation committee that I was on also started its meetings. I can't say much about that validation committee for the very simple reason that at our very first meeting, we were told we needed to sign confidentiality agreements. We were, for the rest of our lives, never to say anything about what happened in validation committee meetings. This was, for me, a very startling experience because I grew up in an open town meeting form of government, New England, and lived for many years in a representative town meeting form of government, and I have indeed been an elected town meeting member for 10 years in my home community. Everything had to be out in the open. Now, it is true that the bodies that developed Common Core were private organizations, National Governors Association, Council for Chief State School Officers, and then Achieve Incorporated, that was a spin-off of the NGA. Even so, everyone knew that the ultimate goal of the work of these committees, which were also supported by another private organization, the Gates Foundation, everyone knew that national standards were to be the final product. So one would have expected a little bit more openness, transparency about why people were chosen for these committees, what their contracts said, what they were paid, what their charge was, the rationale for choosing these people. We knew almost nothing about any of the important matters that every state, when it developed its own standards, usually made available to the citizens of that state, if not on a national level. So we have a situation in which we have a huge common effort to have as many states as possible share the same standards. For what reasons? As many of you know, not all of you, several major reasons were given for the need to have national standards. One will be elaborated on more by Professor Milgram. We were told we needed to expand the STEM pipeline. We were also told it was important not only to raise academic achievement, but to have more consistent academic expectations across all states. Nobody pointed out at the time that interstate mobility was about less than 2% in the country, so this was not a terribly powerful reason, but nevertheless, this was one of the selling points for Common Core, that we needed to make sure that military children and others who moved from state to state would have the same expectations no matter where they were. What was also not pointed out was that while indeed the highest achieving countries have national standards, so do all the others, the ones at the bottom. National standards are not correlated with high achievement. There are some other factors that make for a difference, one of which I know because that was part of the chair that I held when I was at the University of Arkansas, teachers, teacher quality. If you want to have good standards, high standards, you must also have the teachers who can teach to them. And the teaching component of Common Core is simply not visible. It hasn't been there. All that has been there has been the effort to pin the results of tests to the evaluation of our teaching staff, not the preparation, recruitment preparation, and selection of those who would become the nation's teachers. It has been, in my perspective, a rather backward way of looking at how you strengthen a nation's public schools. What I did in Massachusetts over 10 years ago was to focus not only on making sure that we had sets of K-12 standards in all subjects that had input from the academic world, so we knew that we had sound standards and content-oriented standards, but we also did a lot of things, and that was what my next book will be about, teacher licensing regulations, teacher licensure tests, to make sure that we were strengthening the teachers we need. And unless we do that, no matter what happens with the standards in California, you're not going to be able to get very far in strengthening public education in this country. because, as I've said in many places, we have had a declining public school system for about 50 years. It goes back, way back before Common Core. It's not the result of Common Core. But Common Core does nothing to strengthen the public schools because it is not strengthening the whole teacher recruitment, admission, training process that would be directed, as we tried to do that in Massachusetts, to very much better standards. The results in Massachusetts speak for themselves. That is why I am here, because we are the only state with basically empirical information, results that suggested that all of the things we did, not just good standards, we had good tests as well as good standards and good licensing regulations, good licensure tests, all of those things contributed to the development and strengthening of the public school curriculum. This is unlikely to happen in the future unless all of those things are brought together. Let me go to the specific issues of Common Core's English Language Arts standards. I am not going to say more about the validation committee because I know that Professor Milgram will have more to say about that. Let me say only that I was one of the 5 people. We were 2 of the 5 people who would not sign off at the end of the year on Common Core's standards. And my specific reasons for looking at ELA standards, I only looked at those for the secondary level primarily. They were not internationally benchmarked, they were not research-based, they were not rigorous. Let me give you an example of a rigorous standard, the kind of standard you once had in your older set of standards. And let me give you an example of a current Common Core standard so that you can understand what the difference in rigor might mean. Now, I'm just picking them basically out of what is available by going to the website. Here is a Common Core standard for grades 9 and 10. It's a very typical one. It asks students to determine a theme or central idea of a text, analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details, semicolon, provide an objective summary of the text. Any good English teacher would know right away that that's a very poorly written standard to begin with. It's got a bundle of activities rolled into one long sentence with a semicolon in it. It connects one activity at the end, provide an objective summary of the text that contradicts basically everything that precedes the semicolon. So we have a problem with the kind of statements that are used as standards. They're skills or strategies or formal kinds of activities for students to engage in. Now let me read couple of standards that were in your grades 11, 12, older document that was dumped for statements like that. Under literary response and analysis, the first one for narrative analysis of grade level appropriate text, 3.2, reads as follows. Analyze the way in which the theme or meaning of a selection represents a view or comment on life using textual evidence to support the claim. It was already there. That idea is not a new idea for Common Core. But you're getting at something that is important and that English teachers spend years and years and years. How do we help children, students find the theme, which is something embedded in a work, its meaning, its comment on life, not its purpose, which goes with informational text. Here's another one, which really gets to the heart of the difference between what California and Massachusetts did and what Common Core doesn't do, unfortunately. Analyze recognized works of world literature from a variety of authors. Under the first one, sub-objective, contrast the major literary forms, techniques, and characteristics of the major literary periods. For example, Homeric Greece, medieval, romantic, neoclassic, modern. Now, why is that a good standard? Because it has some cultural content. It shapes where the teacher is going to go. It doesn't tell the teacher what work specifically to teach. The teacher can use the Iliad, the Odyssey, or find other appropriate plays or tragedies from that period of time. But at least it directs both the curriculum in the school and the assessment towards getting built the literary historical knowledge that should come out of a K-12 curriculum in English to make students truly college ready. Those are standards. What is in Common Core are not standards. And you can look in vain, and the only two that you might find that seem to have a little cultural content because they talk about American literature or seminal political documents are there only because I put them there. Otherwise, they wouldn't have even been there. I was asked about February after starting to write criticisms of the empty nature of statements in the document. I was called by two different people, what would satisfy me? I said, get some content into the standards. So they took two standards from the American Diploma Project, put them in at the wrong grade levels. They were in the document, but they were there at the wrong grade levels. And that was it. They stand out like sore thumbs because all the rest are empty skills. In any event, let me go back to the handout that you may have picked up. The missing standards that are simply not there, but are in your old California, as well as the Massachusetts document. No standard on the history of the English language, no standard on British literature aside from the study of one Shakespeare play, no standard on authors from the ancient world, classical Greece and Rome. As we just heard, there is reference to the period, at least that was supposed to be used for your older curriculum, and no standard on selected pieces from the Bible as literature so that students can learn about its influence on English and American literature. We know from other research that up till 1940, the two most quoted works that influenced all writers in the English-speaking world were the King James Version of the Bible and Shakespeare's plays. Those were the two major works. So how can educated students who are presumably college-ready not have any basis in understanding those works and where their influence showed up? And that is one of the great holes in the current Common Core English Language Arts standards. There are many deficits, and I've listed the major ones on this page for you to think about. It's hard to specify exactly where these problems are located because they are more general than specific topics, as you will hear in math. There are problems with both documents, but the problems are different because the two subjects are different. Major issue in ELA, in Common Core, is its stress on writing, not reading. Any teacher knows that students need to do more reading than writing, today in particular. That good writers have always been good readers, and that if you want to produce better writing, you need to make sure students are reading good English prose. Teachers have known that for a long, long time. But that is not the emphasis in Common Core. And part of the problem, I will claim, and I have written about this in many places, is that the people who were chosen to write Common Core's English Language Arts standards were not qualified to do it. The major writers were not English majors, they had no teaching experience at any grade level, and they have never written about education in any serious way. So we had people who were chosen for reasons we still do not know to write national standards and to produce statements that do not capture what or do what we think should be done in a K through 12 English class. We also have not only a stress on writing, not reading, but a stress on reading informational texts, not complex literary texts. Why does that matter? It matters because if you can tease out anywhere how critical thinking, but primarily analytical thinking, reading, writing, and thinking get developed. They get developed in English classes when English teachers use complex literary works and show kids how to read between the lines. That is the basic development of analytical reading. And if you reduce complex literary texts in your English class, which Common Core does at all grade levels, 50-50 approximately for informational texts, 50% for imaginative literature, you are reducing the opportunities for kids to learn how to read between the lines. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean, because I saw how this worked with a very large group of high school English teachers at an NCTE conference a couple of years ago. Take the very simple poem by Wordsworth, which you may or may not be familiar with, "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky." Third stanza down, it's a very short poem, has a line, "And the child is father to the man." You toss that out to English teachers, which is like tossing out red meat, and you ask them, how would you approach teaching children to interpret that, high school students? And they can go at it for an hour. I watch them. They love it. This is the sort of thing they studied, did in college as English majors. How do you go about interpreting that? You go back and forth inside and outside that poem to make sense of that line, to come up with an interpretation. That is the way in which we, so far as we can tell, analytical reading, writing, and reading, thinking become developed. Not by reading math textbooks, history textbooks, or science textbooks. Those are textbooks or informational pieces designed to convey information or knowledge. And they're not designed to be ambiguous, ironic, or to have the other literary qualities that mean you have to tease out the meaning and figure out what's going on. So you have a reduction in literary study, an increase in informational text, which has been justified openly because it's been part of a national controversy for about 4 or 5 years since the standards came out. It's been justified on the grounds that, well, when you're adults, for the most part, what you read is information. So therefore, which is the wrong therefore, doesn't fit there, but that is the reasoning that was used by whoever came up with that idea. It may or may not have been David Coleman himself. He was the chief architect, but we don't know if this was his inspiration in the middle of the night or not. But it has been said that if most of the reading we do as adults is informational, therefore that's what English teachers should be doing in K-12. There's no therefore connecting that, because we have absolutely no research evidence that if you increase informational reading, it will make students better able to read college-level materials of any kind, not to prepare them for STEM careers, and certainly focusing on a lot of literature didn't mean that most students became English majors either, but there was something about reading rich works of literature written with what we all felt was quality prose that did make us informed, educated readers, good readers. So we have these problems with an overall structure of the document that cannot easily be repaired unless we totally junk it. This gets into another issue. Common Core's standards have no mechanism for revision. They were not made to be revised. Apparently they were made to be carved in stone because the tests were to be based upon them. But they were privately copyrighted by the organizations that were funded by the Gates Foundation to develop them. There's no mechanism for revising them, and right now 25 to 30 states who are trying to get out of Common Core are having an awful hard time getting out of this jar of molasses because they can't revise standards that are privately copyrighted. They could add a little bit, up to 15%, but they can't change anything because in some cases there is a clear contract, as I saw in North Dakota recently, that said those standards had to be adopted verbatim, could not be changed, not one single word. So you have serious issues if you find problems with these standards. There's no way any state can revise them. Even if there's a state law that says that you routinely or in a timely fashion want to revise your state standards because they now have been incorporated as your state standards, but there's no way you can revise them. And most teachers, if they were able to speak freely, would go down to number 6. This is where I'm going to end. These standards badly need to be revised, at least at a sentence level, because they're so poorly written. Most are uninterpretable without unpacking them. Now, this is a peculiar word to use for standards, which should be self-explanatory and clear. But usually when teachers were given the first look at Common Core standards, they were told they needed to unpack them. You unpack something only if it's a kind of mess to begin with, and you've got to figure out what's going on, as that badly written sentence I gave you before, that is a literature standard, is an example of. At least 3 different activities bundled into one seemingly long sentence. So you have serious issues to contend with today because your State Board of Ed, for reasons it alone can answer, and it's never been asked to answer to the charge, decided to give up one of the best sets of standards in the country, your older set of standards, in not only ELA, but science and in math and in history. And in the future, you will be asked to adopt very inferior sets of standards in science and history to go along with the inferior sets of math and English standards you've already adopted. Who can possibly benefit from that? Is that an example of social justice? I don't think so. But these kinds of issues needed discussion and never did get discussed. I will be happy to answer questions later on, but I think my time is all up now. Thank you very much.
I guess the election results that just came in tell us that the issues that people perhaps in this audience have with Common Core are much more widely spread than just here. That state superintendents in a number of states lost in their positions to opponents whose only platform was, the first thing I'm going to do when I get in is get rid of Common Core. And then that governors had to back off of their support of Common Core throughout the majority of the states in this country because it threatened their re-elections. So I think we can safely assume that there is widespread concern about what's going on with Common Core. And let's see, and so what I'm going to do is to fill in some background that unfortunately will probably increase your concerns. And these are things that went on in the validation committee, of which I was also a member, and indeed I was the only content PhD on the evaluation committee. All the other members who had an advanced degree had their advanced degrees in education, EDDs, not PhDs. There's a huge difference. And so as a result, I was the only content expert on the validation committee, and I was in mathematics. I still am, I think. So almost by default, I was the one who interfaced between the validation committee and the math writing team. So basically, I was the validations committee's representative overseeing the writing of the standards by the writing team. So to understand a little bit more about that, I'm quickly going to review the charge to the committee. The charge to the validation committee was to review the research and the validity of that research for every standard in the Common Core standards, and if there is a standard that is missing, and that you can show by existing research is essential to the development of your standards, or is something that is common or even universal in the standards of the high-achieving countries, then you have the authority to put that in whether the writing team agrees or not. So you can see that the validation committee was a very powerful influence on the structure and development of the Common Core. And as I say, by default, you're looking at the guy who was overseeing the math writing. Well, what happened? That's all fine in theory, and people look at it and say, look, he had that's validation committee. 23 members of the validation committee signed off on this thing, and only 5. Actually, in the world of education, 5 out of 28 or 29 is huge. The tendency in education is to be unanimous. And 5 out of 29 is just huge. That's a large number of people who declined to sign off. But any rate, so I was one of this group that signed off, and I'm going to try to tell you what happened. So I refused. And I'm going to tell you what my reasons were. Okay. So the thing that you have to understand, Sandy told you a little about the beginnings of this process, that there was initial development of high school standards, and then they were written, so the rough-in of them was given initially, and then this writing team wrote up detailed standards based on the expectations in this rough version, and that was the first draft that came out in September of 2009. Okay, I read it. I wouldn't have come onto the committee as California's representative, because that's what I was. I wouldn't have come onto the committee if I wasn't strongly in favor of having good, solid, respectable, nationally based and used standards. And so we got the first draft, and the first draft in mathematics stopped with an Algebra 1 course. There was no mathematics on that set of standards that went beyond Algebra 1. Now, what does that mean? Remember that the standards were advertised, and they were advertised to me and to Sandy as well this way, They are advertised as making students career and college ready, and we're supposed to be benchmarked to the best of the international standards. So we would be able to be competitive with the people who currently, or had 4 years ago, were just wiping us out in terms of the degree of knowledge they had coming up out of high school in these other countries, the high-achieving countries, versus us. One bit of datum that might be of help here is this: the only time we participated in one of these international tests at the 11th grade level. So there are 4th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade level tests that are given every 2 or 4 or 8 years internationally to any nation that wants to pay to get into them. And we competed on the 11th grade level only once. We generally compete on 4 and 8. And you don't see any of our 11th grade results because here's what they are. In 1995, we competed in our only 11th grade test from TIMSS. And what did we do? How did we do? Well, the really high-achieving countries didn't participate. They didn't need to. They knew where they stood. But we participated because we thought it was a good idea, and we thought we would beat the pants off the countries that remained. You know where we came in? Dead last. Dead last. Technically only 2 countries scored below us, but their scores were 0 since they were disqualified. So we're not doing so well. And so I was reasoning that uniform, strong standards that would prepare people, as we said, for college and career would be just the thing we needed, especially if they were internationally benchmarked. Okay? And so that was my perspective. And when I saw the Algebra 1, that these things ended with Algebra 1, I started looking into it. It didn't seem sensible to me. And I rapidly found from statistics as it was available from the National Center for Education Statistics, that's a subdirectorate in the U.S. Department of Education, I rapidly found the following data. What happens if you leave high school with only an Algebra 1 background and attempt to go to college and expect to get a degree in due course? Their data showed me, or told me, it was specific data for this situation, that if you stopped with Algebra 1, then there was a 7% chance that you would ever get a college degree in any area. Not him, any area, 7%. And my gosh, I was thinking to myself, look, this can't be considered college ready. You can't say that a kid is college ready if he has a 7%, or she has a 7% chance of getting a degree. That's crazy. So I went and talked to the lead authors on the writing teams, both of whom were competent mathematicians. That is, they had PhDs in the subject. And I said to them, this is weird. This is crazy. We can't stop at that level because this is the data that we're dealing with. You have defined college ready to be a 7% chance of getting a degree. And that's just irrational. And they said, look, Jim, you don't have to convince us. We know. But we were told what we were supposed to do. And they looked at me, and it was quite clear that they fully expected that I would go and talk to the people that had told them this and explain to them that this simply wouldn't fly. That level would not fly. And that's what I did. I went over to Achieve and talked to the people who were telling the writing team that Algebra 1 was where we stop, because it had been decreed that Algebra 1 is all you need to get through college. There was no evidence, but it was decreed. And I talked to these people, and I showed them all sorts of evidence for what this means. I showed them what was actually going on in the really high-achieving countries, which is scary when you compare it to this sort of feeble business. And I showed them what the Presidential Commission on Mathematics had just come up with, what they assumed was an absolute minimum, which went fully through Algebra 2, and they said that's only the beginning. There has to be a pathway to calculus available. And I showed them all of this material from all sorts of sources, and they were getting more and more glum. And finally, we stopped discussing it, and I went away, and a few days later, I heard from the writing team that they were going to be able to go and add a week geometry course and a week Algebra 2 course. They were pleased because they thought I could do my magic again and get into the standards a pathway to calculus. Unfortunately, I could not, and the reason that I could not was that suddenly the charge of the validation committee was dramatically changed. So we received about 4 days later, the validation committee as a whole received a letter from unnamed sources who presumably were the real leaders of the project, but we never saw who they were. They were never identified. And it announced to us that we could no longer talk to the members of the writing teams, and we no longer had the right to add standards to that were missing to the set of standards the writing team produced. And indeed, the only thing we were required to do was to sign a letter saying that the standards were excellent and benchmarked against the top achieving countries in the world. I'm a mathematician. I'm not an educator, and I'm even a lousy teacher when it comes down to that at Stanford. One thing that mathematicians are pretty universal about is if something is wrong, then we simply won't go along with it. So I tried my best. I tried to get higher level standards in there, but it just wasn't going to happen. And since the resulting standards, Common Core standards in mathematics, were not internationally benchmarked against the high-achieving countries, but simply internationally benchmarked, which is a vacuous statement. It says, gee, I looked at the standards of Taiwan and Hong Kong and Singapore and places like that really do well, and I looked at them, and there were these standards, and a few of the standards in Common Core were identified with some of the standards there. It doesn't say anything more than that. Those few could be standards that were common to every set of standards in the world. So to say, as we were being asked to, they're internationally benchmarked, and have that phrase cleverly structured so that most of the audience would interpret it as benchmark against the top countries. That's not what it means. That was embarrassing to me. It was embarrassing. It was insulting. And I couldn't sign off on that. I couldn't sign off on that they were research-based. For example, the geometry that they added was based on a failed experiment in the old USSR in the late 1970s, where a geometry sequence was put together that looked amazingly like what is being asked for in Common Core, but it was restricted to the top achieving kids in the USSR. It didn't matter. Didn't matter. To do it right was so hard for even these kids that it lasted for about a year and a half, and it quickly went away. That's the only research for the geometry. And that's an indication of the quality of the research that is underlying Common Core. There's no way I could sign off. So, now let's look at another subject here. I mentioned that if you stop with Algebra 1, you have a 7% chance of getting a degree ever in any subject. Well, we now have a document in its final form that stops with a weak Algebra 2 course. Well, let's be generous and say it's a real Algebra 2 course, and let's ask again the question, what does the NCES data say about the probabilities of getting a college degree with just an Algebra 2 background? Well, it varied over time, but it kept dropping. So every 10 years, they examine and follow an entire class, and they get data every 10 years. And that was part of the data set that they were looking at, and I mean that was part of the data that they extracted from the data set and was available, and so it was declining significantly for reasons that were a little obscure. But the best estimate today is that between 31 and 33% of the kids who stopped with Algebra 2 would ever get a college degree in any subject. Well and good. I mean, that's better than 7. But, I mean, from my perspective, to say something is college ready would mean that, for me, that there's at least a 50% chance that a kid is going to get a college degree if the kid has the background that you're asking for. Okay? I mean, I think that's reasonable. 50% is reasonable. But this is only 33%. So it's a very, it's a very weak definition of college readiness. Thank you. And still, it's better than Algebra 1, but boy, that's not saying all that much. So you know, and it turns out that more recently the NCES actually gave me a piece of data that was allowed me to focus in on the same set. What is the probability that kids who intended to major in a STEM area, everybody knows what STEM is, right? No? Okay, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So anybody who wants to major in those areas and maybe in a technical, a related area like operations research, computer science, so forth, that I will roughly call STEM. And so what is the probability that a high school graduate who has an Algebra 2 background and nothing more, who wants to major in STEM, what is the probability that that student will get a STEM degree? Anybody want to guess? Okay, go lower. 0, almost. 2. Right, 2. It's 2%. i.e., there's a 1 in 50 chance that such a student will ever get a STEM degree. Oh boy, but one of the 3 main pillars on which Common Core is based is strengthening the STEM pipeline. And gee whiz, there is no way I could see that this made any sense. But that's what we're stuck with. I mean, as Sandy pointed out, we can't change that document. It's copyrighted. And we, on validation, repeatedly asked for a mechanism for changing things, We knew there would be problems, and we wanted a mechanism so that you could produce new editions. And we never got a response. We never got one word of response from the people, the hidden group of people that were controlling what was going on. So we're really stuck with this. And we're stuck with that level. But anyway, let's return to this, to the question of college readiness. And let's say, as I told you, I don't think it's rational to have less than a 50% chance of succeeding in college be called college readiness. So you can go back to the data from the NCES and find out when does it happen that a student has a 50% or better chance of receiving a college degree of any kind, not just STEM, of any kind. And I'll tell you what the numbers are. That if you add in, instead of finishing with Algebra 2, you finish with trigonometry, then there's a 60% chance. There's a big jump. And that would be acceptable, but minimal. If you finished with pre-calculus, it's higher. And if you finish with calculus, it's 86%. Now, that's really high enough. So you would probably achieve a satisfactory definition of college readiness and Common Core if you included at least trigonometry, and optimally, if you included an option of calculus, you'd have a very sensible situation. Thank you. All right. So we can look at the status quo and see across the country, because even national standards, we can see across the country, how many of our high schools across the country offer calculus? Okay, fair enough. But that's not a fine enough question. Let's refine it. Let's look at the top quintile economically among districts in the country, so the top 20% economically, the top 40%, the top 60%, the top 80%, and finally the lowest quintile. Now let's compare the top quintile with the lowest quintile and look at what we get. 75%, nationwide, 75% of the colleges that are in the top quintile economically have a calculus course available. 40% have in the lowest quintile. As to regards trigonometry, which as we've seen is really kind of minimal, 85% have calculus in the highest quintile, and about 60%, which is pretty decent, but still pretty poor in a way, have trigonometry in the lowest quintile. So, and now, in the reality of Common Core, the situation is, of course, that neither one of these is required. There are no standards in Common Core at all that relate to these things. And in a minute, I'm going to quickly describe as something that is highly non-obvious to people, that, the response when this is pointed out to schools and principals and superintendents and so forth is, oh, no problem, we'll add trig and we'll add calculus, we just make sure we'll do it, and we fix the only problem that you're pointing out. And we'll see that's actually not feasible. So, at any rate, so let's see. Yeah. Okay, so Okay, so I guess I've said enough about that. Let me go on I'll get to the feasibility issue now. So I have to tell you a little bit about mathematics and what's called scope and sequence in standards. The standards, you see, if you look at the standards for an 8th grade standard, maybe that standard that relates to and analyze in solving a simple a simple linear equation, then you want to look at what does it require that a student know from previous classes, and what's the reason that you might want to put this in at all? What in the higher classes and in real life, what is it that standard will be used to support? Okay, there's one thing again, and this is essential because you have to remember that mathematics is entirely hierarchical. In mathematics, everything you do in 4th grade depends, or anything you do in 4th grade, depends on everything you did in 3rd grade and the quality of the learning that the kids has in 3rd grades of all those topics. If you don't know a topic, it is going to affect you in 4th grade. A 3rd grade topic will affect you in 4th grade. And the same with 8th grade. If you don't know all the topics from 7th grade, it will affect you in 8th grade. There will be topics that you will suddenly get lost in, and then in 9th grade, that area will be necessary for other topics. You'll get further behind, and so on and so forth. That's the idea of scope and sequence. And what you do when you actually analyze a set of standards in mathematics is you look at your top set of standards in the highest kind of courses that are there, and you say, okay, what are the topics in the earlier grades that these depend on? And they'd better be there. If they're not there, then the kids won't learn it. They're going to have to take this topic in grade 11, perhaps in trigonometry. They won't learn it because they don't have the foundation to learn it. And you get this phenomenon that fundamentally you cannot teach the topic of trigonometry if the standards that support it, that are necessary for the topics in trigonometry, are not present in the lower grades. So there's this notion of scope and sequence, and when you look at the same thing, you do that for trigonometry and you do that for calculus, then you get a notion of, quote unquote, in mathematics, missing standards. If the standards that support trigonometry and calculus are not there in the lower grades, then you have a problem. Now, what I did was to produce my own, my own missing or delayed standards.
You're going to be losing. Take this on. Sorry. You just can't lean on this.
Where are the glasses?
Okay, hold on. Here we go.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
All right, I have to stay away from this. Okay, but fortunately, I only have a minute. So I have this handout, which is part of the handout, is stapled to the handout that Sandy showed you, and these are the missing topics in the Common Core. Well, these topics are actually I was selective in putting these in. It wasn't random, the choices of these topics. These are the topics that, by and large, are crucial in supporting trigonometry and calculus. These topics are all over the place, and Common Core cannot be changed. So you don't get them, and they won't be there when the kids need them in trigonometry and calculus. So, in effect, you can't really have trigonometry and calculus courses. You can't teach them unless the kids have independent tutoring to fix that issue. So, and these are some of the further problems with Common Core, and I hope I've convinced you that they're very real. That I'm not disturbed about this for trivial reasons.
So yes, I'm Kevin Snyder, and I'm an attorney with Pacific Justice Institute. We maybe a little over a year, maybe it's been longer. Time flies as I get older, but we were getting lots of inquiries about Common Core. I didn't know what it was, and from what I was getting, I wasn't terribly interested in it. However, there was such concern about it that we were running into people wanting to opt out of Common Core, and I saw that there were some people who were floating around some opt-out forms, and some of them were even made by attorneys. But I looked at them and said, these won't work. They're just legally inadequate. And so I was tasked with the job of drafting an opt-out form. So perhaps some of you, of what you've heard tonight or what you've researched before, you're not terribly keen on the prospect of your child taking the state assessment tests in the spring. And so there is a legal option to have your child opted out of that. And I have provided the forms for you, and there is I've got them just on front and back. One side are the instructions, the other side is the form. You fill it out. Very, very simple, easier than going to the DMV, and you get it to your school. I have also stapled a information sheet. So in law, we call this a quid pro quo. How's your Latin? It means this for that. You could take a opt-out form with you if you will fill out the sheet and give it to me. All right. So that's the quid pro quo. It's this for that. Okay. And tonight I'm going to just put these right at the edge of the stage. So let me do it now before I forget. And you're welcome to use them. This form also does some other things. It has 4 opt-outs on it, and the first one deals with the state assessment testing. Perhaps you're wondering, how do I know this form will work and the other forms out there may not get you where you want to go? The reason is that I have done the old lawyer's trick of plagiarizing the statute. I just took the opt-out statute, cut and pasted it, and put it in here, so it will work. The other thing is there are 3 other things you could get out of. We are finding that there are some privacy concerns. My concerns, I know that the Academy is very interested in academics. Spent their life there. That's not my concern, though I'm sure it's very important. My concern is a constitutional one because I'm a lawyer, and I'm concerned about the potential invasion of privacy, of getting personal information from the kids and then sending it off to a third party. Did you know in California, since the 1970s, you can't even take a spelling quiz that a kid has and read off the scores? Johnny got 7 out of 10, Sally got 8 out of 10, Frederick got 4 out of 10, and Martha got 10 out of 10. You can't even do that in the classroom because of privacy concerns. It's nobody else's business but the kids and the teachers. So we have grave concerns that information in testing and what have you is going outside of the district to third parties. Gives me, it's Orwellian. So in any event, some of the things we have come across are questions about psychological issues, issues of sexual matters. My thought, if you want to know, is that the government has no business in your business. You have a right to be left alone. They need to stay out of your bedroom, certainly need to stay out of your kid's bedroom, and it's just none of their business. And that may be old-fashioned, but that's the way I see it. Well, fortunately, there are some specific statutes that protect parents from that, you have to first get written parental permission. I just had a situation in a very large school district I'm not going to tell you where it is, a very large school district nearby. And they were asking kids about how they identify as far as their gender, and what is their sexual orientation, and whose business is that? And so, come to find out, I told the parents, well, ask if you get out of it. And they said, well, you can get out of it if you're an aggressive enough parent to go out and ask. The truth of the matter is, on these types of questions, opt-out is not good enough. You have to have opt-in. You have to have a signed written permission from the school district. So I sent a love letter to them and told them to cease and desist from giving out the surveys without prior parental written permission, and also to destroy those that they've already collected. And their lawyer sent me an email back, surprisingly not giving me the California salute, but saying, yes, we will stop doing this and we will go hunt those surveys down and have them destroyed. So that is something that I think this kind of form will help you with. It will put the schools on notice. So I encourage you to take one. And if you don't want, maybe you don't care what they ask your kids on certain things, you're just interested in the academics, you could simply line out the opt-out provisions that you don't want. And that's perfectly fine. One other thing, and I'm going to be short because I think there's a lot of people who have some questions tonight. One other thing you might be interested in is people want to know what you do other than opting out. One of the things you can do is in California, you could join, there's a statute that allows parents to join site committees, curriculum committees, and you could infiltrate those, gather great data, and if you get enough of your co-parents to join, you could stack the committees and keep stuff out. The way curriculum typically works, say textbooks or what have you, the board doesn't get the raw material and read through the textbooks and vote yes or no, and if they get 3 out of 5 votes, it's good. They're too busy and probably disinclined and would just skim it anyway. So what happens is these things go to committees, parent, teacher, community committees, and these committees go through the curriculum, and they make a decision if they are going to recommend it to the board or not. And when they do that, it's very much like if you remember your old government classes, the Senate committees or assembly committees, before something goes to a full vote on the floor, it has to pass through committee, and you could kill a bill by not getting a majority vote in the committee. That's how it works oftentimes for textbooks and those sorts of things. So if you could join a committee and with your school, volunteer, maybe if you're a member of the faith community, maybe each church could get one parent to join one committee for 1 year and kind of serve. I mean, I've been on it myself with my kids, and it's not gripping stuff, but nonetheless, it's a good community service. So anyway, do that, and you could stop stuff before it metastasizes and goes through the whole school. And with that, I'm going to cede the rest of my time, and so we could have some questions.
Well, I am very proud to introduce ELISE Cook, who is one of our moms in our group, and she's going to talk to you about data mining. And I think she's going to surprise some of you with some of the information she has. ELISE?
Well, I plan tonight to mostly clarify what Mr. Snyder was talking about when he was saying Orwellian. What do I mean by clarifying that? Oh, good. Thanks, Nicole. You've already got it up and everything. Mainly to discuss what's being collected on our kids, how it's being used, and where it's going. Next slide, please. Until just a few years ago, as Mr. Snyder alluded to, data was kept, any kind of school records or whatnot were pretty much, and actually Dr. MILGRAM mentioned it too, pretty much kept at the local school level or at the state level. If it was personally identifiable, it didn't go any farther than that. And there were very, very strong regulations in place to keep the purposes for any access to that data very, very narrow. But since the last few years, the Federal Department of Education has made a couple of really strong inroads into turning that on its head. The first is this one right here. The same race to the top competition that forced states to adopt the Common Core sight unseen also required states to create longitudinal databases. Longitudinal simply means over time. So literally collecting information from cradle to through career. They use that term a lot. And to format it in such a way that it's going to be able to be used nationwide. So now the data is going to be available everywhere. The second prong, and that's the next slide, is reinterpreting FERPA itself, the Federal Education Rights Privacy Act, that for 40 years, again, kept that purpose by which data could be accessed very, very narrow, has now been redefined so widely and so broadly that anyone who wants to use personally identifiable information in an accessory manner can do so with the blessings of the DOE. And furthermore, you as a parent are not going to be notified of that, let alone be able to give your permission, because that's been changed to a best practice as opposed to what used to be absolutely necessary. Next slide. Okay. So what exactly is being collected? These are not your father's school records anymore. This is not just your test scores and your grades and whatever. There's quite a bit more information being collected. And if you go onto the SEDS website, the Common Education Data Standards, you can see for yourself exactly what version they're on, which is version 4, that has over 400 points of data that are supposed to be collected on your kid. But it gets better because there's a more extended version that has 1,349 points of data being collected on your kid, including the list I developed there. And you're looking at this list and thinking, well, some of this stuff is already protected, like my health records through HIPAA and some of this other stuff. Again, go onto the Department of Education website, and they have a white paper that specifically says, no, HIPAA doesn't apply here. We're not a health institution, so we can keep this data and we can do whatever we want with it. And, they put it in good terms, but that's what it basically says. And you're thinking, well, what about, at least maybe for these disciplinary records, at least your police records and so forth are sealed at the age of 18, so you get a fresh start and whatnot. But again, not in this case. They will remain on your permanent record and available to whomever the DOE says can have it. And I should mention that the two major industries that paid for the development of the Common Core were high-tech industries and insurance industries. Think about that for a minute. And of course, commercial interests all over the place. They're going to be selling you all kinds of products, but the IRS intends to use some of this data, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Labor, and lots and lots and lots of private corporations intend to be able to use this data, including your future employers and all of that. So, there's some issues here. And finally, you're probably looking at the last bullet point there, psychometrics, and you're mouthing that. What are psychometrics? Next slide. It's nothing more or less than an entire psych profile on your kid. So this is Merriam-Webster's definition. I thought it was as good as anything. And the idea is to get all of your child's beliefs, attitudes, values, personality, basically recorded for personal use or for their uses. And you're thinking, well, what are their uses? Is it just to be able to take that data and personalize their education experience? Sure, it might be, but there is something a little bit more sinister. Next slide. This is a report. In tech data collection. You're thinking, well, as long as how is that stuff being recorded in the classroom? Well, this information, the Common Core is extremely tech-driven. Everything is going online, including even the passages your kids are supposed to be reading. And the reason for that is you can tag this information and literally keep track of what your children are interested your children specifically, how long it took them to answer things, ask them personal questions along the way. And of course, these are not sheets that are coming home, so you don't know that along the way, with all of this computer stuff, they were asked about their sexuality. They were asked about their honesty for different things. My kid last year, she was doing something called iReady. Any of you recognize that? I see a few heads. And right in the middle of a particular lesson that was otherwise pretty good, it came to a screeching halt and asked her about online music piracy. And what did she think about that? And she had to answer what she felt, one way or the other in order to go on to the lesson. So you're getting a lot of this, and they're just continuing to collect it. But, like I said, there's a little more sinister idea, and that's the next slide, sorry. This is a report that the Department of Education came out with, and I understand this was the draft. I understand there is now a final, and it's talking about basically molding kids to have the personality that they feel is important. I looked up the 5 people who wrote this thing. None of them have any background in psychology that I could find. No child development experts here, but they determined that grit, tenacity, and perseverance are the things that we should have all children manifest in their personalities. Now, I got to tell you, I know 3 people with grit, tenacity, and perseverance, so really the Department of Education should, be careful what it wishes for. But regardless, in the process, you don't have to go very far in this 200-plus page monster before you realize some of the more sinister aspects of this. And next slide. Right there in the executive summary, pages 7 and 8, it talks about if your kid happens to have picked up some kind of extraneous values out there from somewhere, that's okay. They can take care of that because it's teachable and malleable. And I bolded beliefs, attitudes, dispositions, and values. So don't worry. They can fix that stuff. Whatever they've picked up elsewhere, they can take care of that for you. And they talk a lot about the data collection, how important it is to collect every single thing about your kid's personality. Next slide. Right down to the point of page 44, the devices that they're going to connect to, that they really want to connect to children in order to get their physiological response to different stimuli. I can't make this stuff up. How much they sweat, what their pulse rate is, where their eyeballs are, where their facial expressions, even like brainwave patterns and so forth. It's really weird. And of course, if the child is not picking this up fast enough, they want to do something called intervention. And these interventions can be up to 10 hours long. We would call it re-education, but the new word now is intervention. And so they go over and over and over about all these different intervention strategies in order to bring about the personality traits they feel are very, very important. Next slide. Here's another program, the Desired Results Development Program, that's being used in California right now for certain children between ages 0 to 12 in various federal programs and so forth. And you can see the various desired developmental results that they want, yet more personality traits. And I submit to you that I don't know if there's any single archetype that's going to make guarantee a successful adult, and that there really is just sort of one, total package there. It really does take all kinds to make a world. And I'm looking at this first one about the socially competent thing. And sure, if you're going to be president, it's probably really good to be able to do that, to have those qualities, kiss those babies, shake those hands. But if you're, as far as I know, no head of state has ever been in the forefront of cancer research as well. Those people are fetuses with shoes, right? Sorry, as Dana Carvey would put it, they're not as socially adept necessarily, and yet they're very successful. Do we want to tell these people, you're a loser. You're not, doing what we feel, you should be doing in terms of your personality, and just drag them down. I find this very, very damaging, what we would be telling children who do not follow the exact round hole we want to put them in. Next slide, please. But wait, there's more. So, there's the whole idea of molding a child, but then there's the whole data mining aspect. Mining involves taking reams of data, sometimes whole, aggregate data and all of this, and being able to make predictive models for it. Now, you're seeing that last bullet point there. I'm not even going to go Minority Report tonight. What I am going to talk about are two other aspects of this data mining. The first being the ability, the stated ability to be able to predict where people are going to be successful. By looking at all of this data, by being able to crunch it, by being able to compare it with other outcomes, we will be able to predict where you're best going to be successful and therefore pick your career for you. And Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, next slide, is literally on record. That's what he looks like. I just wanted to show you a picture of him. Is literally on record as being able to say, all right, by the age of 7, I want to be able to look at a child and say, you're on target to go to college or not. And be able to separate the college kids from the non-college kids and track, put them in their tracks and, put them in their places by the age of 7. But again, I kind of know a few things about data and whatnot. And the thing with this data is it's nothing more than a historical record. It cannot measure capacity. It simply tells you how they did on something, but not whether they could have done better or whatever else. So, for example, let's say the non-college side, somebody on that side suddenly gets inspired by either a tragic event or even a really, really good event and says, that's me. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to be the one who does this. And do we want to tell those kids, oh, no, sorry, you're pumping gas, And you think maybe that's dramatic, but if you talk about to some of the most passionate, tireless, indefatigable and productive people in some field, they all have stories like that. Well, my brother died and I vowed I was going to cure this disease. Or I flew a plane for the first time when I was X years old and I decided that was going to be my career forever. And nothing in our predictive models or our algorithms or our science or whatnot can work with that. But what it does do is stifle innovation. It does cull people's choices for them, and it basically destroys their freedoms. And yet there's one more aspect to this data mining that's a real problem. Next slide. This is David Coleman, what he looks like. He's the chief architect for the entire Common Core. And he went to a conference called Datapalooza at the White House in 2012. And he gave this, I think it was the keynote speech. And in that speech, he said, this data that we're collecting is fantastic. We're going to know where everybody is. We're going to really be able to understand everybody and mobilize people and whatnot. And we're never going to lose an election again. Yeah, what does that mean? He thinks that by knowing enough about people and being able to craft your message and manipulate you and so forth, that he'll be able to drive you where he wants you to go, be able to herd you better. And anyway, you probably started listening to this talk thinking, well, what's the big deal? I don't have anything to hide. But you do. You have a free republic to protect. And so I cannot stress enough, Mr. Snyder's forms are bulletproof. He went through the entire California Education Code. Man, his reward is in heaven. And picked out exactly where the California Education Code says you may not do this. This is actually illegal. And they even promise pro bono to defend you if you run into legal problems. I have successfully used these forms this is my second year now, and have had absolutely no issues with them. Any opposition just evaporates as soon as my kids hold up their forms. And like I said, I can't stress enough, use them. And if you can't get any forms tonight because we run out or something, pji.org has all of them available. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We're going to move into the next segment which is audience questions. And if someone has an audience if they have a question from the audience, we would just like you to come forward to the 2 microphones that we have, maybe 2 or 3 at a time. Don't get too piled up. And we'll just go back and forth. And whatever your question is for anyone, including Miss Elise, who left the stage, you might have a question for her. We would like her to answer that as well. And why don't we just start with you, my dear?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My question actually is directed towards Mr. Snider, and actually maybe also Elise. I thank you for creating your Common Core opt-out form. We used it. It was sent back to us, saying that there was not a need for it because our kids were not going to be tested in anything until the 3rd grade. And so I feel a little bit furious. Well, maybe not a little bit, actually quite furious, because the fact that if it's also to protect us from data mining, which is what we have a huge concern about, that the fact that they have sent it back to us unopened tells us that they're going to do whatever they want to do. And so how do we go about then protecting ourselves further with having it sent back to us?
Can you tell us what school district that was from?
Mount Diablo Unified School District.
Which one?
Mount Diablo Unified School District.
Doesn't Diablo mean devil? Well,
touche.
Yeah, I would tell you what to do with the devil, but or tell them what they could do. But there is some pushback sometimes, and one of the things you have to remember is that this is a state law that they are required to do. You are not asking permission; you are directing them, and so the issue is how do you get them to take it? What you do, I suggest, is one of 2 ways. One is you could fax it as long as you have a transmittal sheet that shows that they got it to that fax number. The other is to scan and email it, and assuming you're not deleting your emails and that sort of thing. That's all you have to do. And then if they do, say, give your kid a test and ask them, what their what their sexual orientation is, or what their parents' income is, or something like that, then we could go after them in court, or with some of these things we could go after their federal funding. And if you wag $1 underneath the educator's nose, it's what happens. So.
If I could just piggyback off of that real quick for Elise, because I know that that they are doing some testing with iReady, and I feel that even though they're in they're second and kindergartner graders, that they are still getting some data mining from that. And so the nod of head tells me that I'm correct in my assumptions. And so I'll go with that, but I wanted just to find out, how do we get rid of this in our district? How do we get out of it?
All right, this is definitely more for Kevin, but in my case, my daughter's 5th grade teacher got on board really, really quickly, and so he just opted her right on out of iReady completely, which was a bummer, because there was a lot that was really good in iReady, but you just could not get past those personal questions. So we came up with alternative workbook stuff and whatnot. That's going to get harder. What do we do about that?
Are you talking about one thing? The opt-out forms don't opt you out of all academic things. In fact, it doesn't opt you out of any academic work except for the state assessment test. It will opt you out of that and personal questions. And but you can't get out of if the problem is it seems to me that they're integrating questions about your religion or your personality or whatever, with, I don't know, division of fractions. I don't know what. Yes. So, yes. So in any event, I would tell my kids, is if they ask you personal questions, you need to have a talk with them. Say, you know what, that's nobody's business but yours, and don't answer it.
It's hard to tell a kindergartner.
Well, here's the other thing you could do is you have a right under the education code to get the curriculum and review instructional materials as a parent. So how? Just say, I want to send them an email. I always do things in emails. Most people like to just call and stuff. As a lawyer, I like a paper trail. And email is actually better than paper in some ways. Just say, I'm a parent, I want to look at all the instructional materials. When will those be available? I'm free after 3 o'clock on Tuesday. And just do that.
Let me just end with this on that question. First of all, you are the parent, and you are not asking them to opt your child out. You are demanding that they do so because the law is behind you. It is the law for you as the parent. You have the right. I would also say that to go to the teacher as well and take the form to the teacher, have a conversation with the teacher. I think you'll find that they're a little more, ready to work with you. All right, yes, go ahead.
I am a mom of somebody who's in TK, transitional kindergarten. That's like before kindergarten. I think I'd like to consider it a practice year. It's my first child. As a mom, I thought, the best way to help my son in getting the best education was for him for me to be more involved. So guess who's on the site council? Okay, so now I'm at site council and I hear something about Common Core, and it's the new thing, and whether or not we like it or not doesn't really matter because it's here. Our school is in, what do they call it? Where they don't pass one of the sections of the 3 main testing levels for 2 consecutive years. What do they call that? Yeah, PI, Program Improvement. So, which gives us the option to change schools if you don't want your child to go there the following year. But my question was, coming here today, I had no idea what Common Core is. I still kind of don't. I know but it seems to me that the demands and the requirements for educating our children are going to be proven so wrong after such a short amount of time, because you said that there's no data, there's no results, there's no numbers that stand behind what Common Core is about to teach our children. And yet Common Core cannot be changed. So what are we going to do when my son gets to 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, to have at least a little bit of faith in our education system? Because if you can't change it, and yet you're going to know all about us, and you want all these answers from our children about the personalities and financials and about the type of people we are, you're invading our space. You're not giving our children the stuff that they need. I mean, wouldn't you assume that the system, Common Core as it is now, because of collecting all the data, is going to show you that it's not working, but yet you can't change it? Where do we go from there?
Let me just answer briefly by saying, of course you can try to change it. Schools have changed for all the time. For hundreds of years, they've been in a process of change everywhere. You simply have to add your voice to voices of others and keep speaking up to your school board, to your superintendent. There's no reason to assume it won't change. Just because the people up above will tell you it's the law and that this is what you have to do. If you see things that you think are not right, are damaging to your child or to your family, you go and speak to your school board and your superintendent. Call them, and call them regularly.
Thank you.
I would say that we also have a couple of Facebook pages we're going to tell you about at the end, so you can get information there. We'll also have other upcoming events as well. So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just have kind of a big picture question. with bringing up the elections, there's now 31 governors that are Republicans. Do you see that politics is going to change and so many states don't do Common Core or opt out of it as a state, that funding goes down? And the other part is the 24 people who signed off on it. Was there something they got out of it? Because ethically, morally, obviously you guys made the right choice. So what made those 24 people pass this? Or would it have passed even without them? Thank you.
Well, we don't know the answer to some of this, but you can look at a few of the people that were on validation and see who did sign off and see what became of them. And one that comes to mind immediately is a colleague of mine at Stanford, Linda Darling Hammond, who is currently head of the SBAC group. So, in other words, the testing consortium that is writing the tests for California was her, maybe it was her prize, maybe she was chosen to head it up for other reasons, but she was on the validation. She's now head of testing for California and many other states in the country. So, yeah, there is a possibility that there were quid pro quos here, but of course I can't assert that this is actually the case.
Go ahead, yes, please.
Hi, I have a big picture question as well. What's the common, and what do post-secondary universities, colleges think about Common Core?
She said, what do the post-secondary education folks think about Common Core?
Because Dr. Milgram talked about college readiness, and I think that's
but we don't know what these other groups think about Common Core because they weren't involved.
There's no prevailing wisdom, no white papers, no discussion.
No,
so they're
there
just
are
waiting
no reports about what they have as attitudes towards Common Core. All we know is that they were not involved as institutions. They were asked to sign off on application material in order to give credit-bearing coursework. But that isn't the entire institution. It was the presidents. And the presidents are not the teaching faculty, typically.
Yeah. Well, I have talked to a number of my colleagues at other universities, and they literally don't believe it. And they haven't, but they will believe it in 3 or 4 years when they start getting the products of Common Core, and what effectively the only response to Common Core that the university will have is to make currently remedial courses into credit-bearing courses. So the end result, there can't be any other end result than a general dumbing down of the college-level courses. However, it hasn't happened yet, and my colleagues are scarcely aware of what has the potential for happening in the short-term future. They'll become aware soon enough, and then we'll see some reaction.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, sir.
My question's for Dr. Milgram, and I'm looking at the form you handed out here today with respect to the math standards in K through 7. And there's a part that says Common Core fails to teach prime factorization. I just want to confirm there's no teaching really at all in the Common Core of prime factorization.
Well, there's barely a mention of primes. So why should it be surprising that they don't do prime factorization? And they don't do prime factorization.
Okay, and then my second question is, you say that it excludes fluent conversion between different forms of fractions, decimals, percents, and so on. I'm not sure what you mean by fluent. Do you mean they touch on it, but they really don't ever get to the point where they can actually make these calculations? Or
no, fluency in that area is a much more rich, if you want to call it, subject. There's a lot more going on with converting between real number form, infinitesimal, the fraction form for those numbers that are fractions, and any other form that you might happen to be dealing with. You can't, for example, there are no algorithms for making that type of conversion. Well, algorithm is by definition something that finishes in a finite amount of time. And there's no finite method that universally will finish when dealing with such conversions. But that's at a much more advanced level. But the point is that there is nothing whatsoever on conversions, and kids in the real life situation where decimals is the usual form that uses things in, but maybe you're giving them as fractions, and you have to convert from the fraction to the decimal when figuring out percents and things like that. In that real life situation there, no, there's no mention of it at all.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to say this is an amazing collection of information that people here and people on YouTube later will be able to do research. I encourage everyone to do research because I came down with probably no less than about 40 different topic points that'll take me weeks, months, or the rest of my life to look into. So I'm going to make a somewhat of a statement question. I just wanted some feedback, possibly Elise as well, because she had some information on data mining. But I have some serious questions about the intention and flaws in the foundation involvement with Common Core, no less than the Gates Foundation, but there's other foundations as well, and what you might have to say about that. And then the second part of the statement is all of the data mining, all of the questions they're gathering on our kids, all of these 1,349 statements or whatever they're gathering, I personally believe, and the data suggests, that they're going to be using this information to separate our kids, those that will conform, those that will be critical thinkers, those that will not follow orders, and eventually, of course, this will be used by the NGOs to figure out how they can actually run a world government and how all of this stuff will be interconnected. So if you could make some statements of that, because I want to hear how we're going to actually move forward. Because all of this stuff about, just Common Core and changing our kids, I mean, we have to opt out, seriously, of this and actually push back and tell these educators that we don't want to be issued into this new, world order and just do what they say. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Elise, do you want to address that?
It's so easy to speculate the motive behind what this might be. And, people throw all kinds of terms around like Agenda 21 or UNESCO or whatnot. And this question always comes up, is this part of the one world order? I can just tell you that it's oppressive enough if it's just right in this country. And so that's enough reason to want to combat it and to push back against it. And I don't even go any farther than that. That's just me.
So I am a substitute instructor at the San Lorenzo Unified School District, and I also coach a couple of seasons out of the school year. So I deal with high school kids on a regular basis daily. When I came to Common Core, I kind of got a glimpse of it last school year. And I even tried to make an attempt to bring it to the attention of some of the other teachers to a point where I started having thoughts that I might start losing opportunities to sub because of hearing some backlash from teachers who didn't agree with me. Also, too, last year I noticed an instruction manual or a book that the kids were using that was in one of the classrooms. And again, being a substitute teacher, I am almost undercover spy almost in that instance. But I was also in the same class again just this past week, and the class is called CSU Expository Reading and Writing Course. Now, for me, when I was in high school, this course would have been just called English 12. where you would have read, as Dr. Stotsky mentioned, different types of literature and write papers based upon that. The book that I saw was basically kind of like a workbook, and instead of having actual novels or things in the classroom, they used these workbooks. Some of the topics include good food, bad food, the value of life, racial profiling, and on top of that, there was one that was called Of Primates and Personhood, will according rights and dignity to non-humans and organisms halt research. So being in that class to hear some of these topics, and the one is specifically this week that I was working with, they were in an English class talking about the effect of Jim Crow laws and the stop and frisk in New York. They were researching Mayor Bloomberg. I just want to get your reaction to hearing some of this stuff, because I know not many people here realize that some of this stuff is in our classrooms already.
What you are probably pointing to, the types of topics that are coming into the English class under the rubric of informational text. Remember, I was pointing out that maybe up to 50% at every grade level, teachers are supposed to be teaching, according to Common Core, something called informational text. Well, English teachers have never really been trained to teach informational text. They do know about a genre called nonfiction, but informational text is different, and there are many peculiar topics that are being made available, short snippets, short articles, op-eds, for the purpose of satisfying Common Core's mandate that about 50% of what they read should be informational. And some of these are coming in not because the topics are approved by Common Core, but because the kind of reading it is being asked for, and teachers don't have supplies of things. Now, a good part of the curriculum problem is that if the focus, as Common Core claims it says, if the focus of the English classroom is literature, then the topics that would be nonfiction or possibly informational should relate to the literary work they're reading. But if they're dealing with contemporary topics of a random, scattered, fragmented nature, then what kids are not getting is a coherent curriculum. And that would be how I would approach the problem. Many parents are very concerned about some of the specific topics that are taught, but overall, the basic problem is that you have a fragmented curriculum in which kids are basically learning nothing. This is in the name of information.
Yeah, and one of my main concerns was the idea of going by the numbers, the metrics of trying to push children to believing one thing and throwing other values aside.
That may result from some of these topics, but the overall curriculum effect is that there is no sequential body of knowledge that is being taught. And these pieces may be used possibly by a teacher or whoever has been supplying them. So the basic approach should be English teachers need to be, in some sense, guided together to figure out how you develop a coherent curriculum of the kinds of readings, different types of readings that they should be reading, and they should relate to the literary work so that there is some sense of there being the context for something. Otherwise, kids come out learning nothing, and that's really your essential problem.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to add a minor comment here that Sandy is concerned, and justifiably so, with the use in English of topics that are really more appropriately directly social engineering. But they also did this in the early 1990s in California, based on the 1992 California standards, which were the genesis of the math wars and which were the reason that I got involved in education issues. And here's an example of a problem from 1992 California standards that is going to show you that they were doing exactly the same things but less efficiently over 20 years ago. So here's a problem. Now, if you have a very high income, this is a problem that is from the California 1992 math framework, and I've got the numbers approximately right, but the idea is pretty much correct. So if you have a very high income, you pay about 11% in taxes. Whereas if you have an average income, you pay about 20% in taxes. Do you think this is fair? Well, that's not a math problem. Come on. The notion of in math, you must be precise, and what the heck can fair mean in a precise sense? So they're doing it wherever they can get away with it. They were doing it then, and all of this material you're concerned about now is very real. These concerns are real because they were real then, and there's not much else to say.
I just wanted to let everybody in the audience know that Dr. Stotsky wrote a free English language arts curriculum, which I printed out at home. And I want to thank you, Dr. Stotsky, for doing that. I do teach 4th grade in Hayward. And I wanted to also ask either one of you a question. Who is the originator, or who are the CEOs, or who are the, leaders in charge of SBAC and PARC? Because I'm very confused about in elementary school of some of the questions, or actually most of the questions that are being asked on the SBAC examinations, and they're being done on Chromebooks. I guess most of the people in the audience who have children in public school have been involved in that, where their kids are taking tests on the computer now. I just wanted to know, where did SBAC and PARC originate from? Who commissioned them to be the test writers?
Okay. It's very easy to answer how they started. They were commissioned by the USDE under Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. There was money from the stimulus money that was appropriated to the Department of Education to fund the development of 2 major testing consortia that would use Common Core standards, and that was the important reason why the standards had to be developed, to measure whatever they thought they needed to measure. It's a separate issue, from K to 12, or to K to college readiness, which was going to then be eventually grade 11. We didn't even know the grade level at first. But the question is, who's behind doing all of this? We don't really know. There are names that you can find if you Google these organizations, who they use to vet the items. There's probably a whole group of teachers. It's a very mysterious kind of operation from my perspective, and there are state departments of education personnel that are claimed to be involved, and I think it's better if you call up your State Department of Ed and ask who the liaison is to Smarter Balance, which is the consortium that California belongs to, and ask if you can find information on who is vetting test items. I can't even find out test specifications in English to know how many passages might be literary, how many might be expository, who are the people developing them aside from the test developers, psychometricians themselves. None of this is very clear, and these are now private organizations.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes, so please go ahead.
Okay. Why was Common Core ever put into place if it was going against the Constitution and the 10th Amendment?
So, Kevin, would you like to answer that? She asked about the Constitution. Why was Common Core put in place if it's unconstitutional?
The 10th Amendment says that the powers that are not specified going to the federal government are reserved to the states. So, for example, the feds handle military, they handle immigration, that sort of thing. The simple answer is that the states have essentially acquiesced to it. They've said they're going to do it. And so who would you sue? Well, if you don't see a state essentially saying we're going to sue the government, because they don't have to opt into this if they don't want to. And so that's the answer to your question.
So we could basically repeal it.
One more piece. The claim is made that this was a state-led venture, which fits in with what you were saying. They don't believe they are unconstitutional. At least they don't answer the question. There are lawyers who have looked and found several statutes that would suggest that the whole Common Core project is unconstitutional. But those who are promoting it would say it was done by private organizations, it was paid for by another private organization, and it was supposedly state-led and voluntary. Now, all of that can be disputed and has been disputed, but that's the kind of argument you get, and Congress hasn't bothered to get into the act.
Yes, over here. First of all, I just want to say I really applaud your work on building the machine. Watched that recently, and I'm excited for it to be at our local theater soon. This is for Milgram. As a mom of a 4th grade math teacher who has pulled my hair out night after night trying to decipher her math homework, what is your perspective on mental math and breaking apart of numbers?
Well, let's just talk about mental math, okay? Fundamentally, mental math is the greatest fraud that has been pushed onto the population here onto the society in the last 40 years. It's not a relevant skill. The skills of mental math are not relevant to mathematics. And mathematics is essential in all of the technical areas today, and math up to maybe Algebra 1 is really, really helpful in everyday life. But mental math is not really relevant. It doesn't do anything. Technically, it doesn't add anything to your mathematical knowledge, and it's something that was done, and for amusement's sake, actually, 100-odd years ago when we didn't have calculators and things like that. But people would be amazed at these automatic calculators, these people with these special talents who you would give them a pair of very long numbers and they would just see in their mind what they were and read off their product or read off their quotient, something like that. It was for entertainment. And I don't see it any differently today.
I just had one more question for SNIDER. We are with the SRVU, the San Ramon Valley Unified School District, and they are still not implementing Common Core until next year. They're working with their Common Core report card and their vendors to get the right curriculum. What is my option? Can I still opt out of practice tests and the things they're doing there?
You can't opt out of purely academic things other than the statewide assessment test. Again, if they're giving you an academic test, whatever it's the C sound for kindergarten or something, you can't opt out of that. What you can do, if you feel like they may be blending personal information that's non-academic, that falls within the parameters of this opt-out form, what you do is you find out by looking at the curriculum first and going to the teacher, say, you don't have my written permission to do this, don't give the test.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we just have 2 more questions that we'll do, and if you still have a question after that, I don't want you to despair, because Dr. Milgram and Dr. Stotsky will make their way out to the lobby and they'll talk for a few minutes with you so you could ask them something person to person. But we do have to start to kind of get ourselves out the door. Yes, please, go ahead.
I was on the committee that the other parent, the other lady was on. Just the name of the committee escapes me right now, but it's where parents, a parent will meet with the teachers and decide how to spend some money. So I was on that committee as well. It's all about the money. I discovered that while I was on there. It's all about the money, and that is what is going on here. And Dr. Milgram, our kids have not been learning in California for years. I had to go into debt to take my child finally out of the public school and put him in a private school that would teach according to how he needed to learn. And somehow we have to get rid of Common Core, period. And I don't have an answer for that. I so appreciate your education, the two of you. It is so important. It is so critically important. And so I just want to thank you. And I want to thank the ladies here and the other parents who put all of this together. It's important that we parents do get involved in our schools. And this is why we're where we are. Because we've just, we're so busy trying to live that we decided to let the teachers in the school district do it. And it used to be many, many years ago they can't do it anymore. We have to get involved.
I have 4 children. None of them are in kindergarten yet. I have 4 children. None of them are in school yet. I have one that's starting school next year. And what would you say to a mother who is considering homeschooling versus putting their child in that public school system? And also, if I did homeschool, what curriculums would you recommend? And my third question is, how can I still affect change if my children are homeschooled?
The value of homeschooling versus placing your children into the regular, normal, public education. And I know Dr. Milgram does have some recommendations, but go ahead, Dr. Stotsky.
Every parent has to think about what options are available given your circumstances and your whatever skills you can offer, knowledge base. And so there are many parents successfully homeschooling and many parents trying out other kinds of schools. This is a decision that I couldn't make from here for you. What do I think about it? It involves consideration of too many factors for me to be able to do more than say that they... I
will say that there are challenges in any method of trying to get your kids a full education, get them to learn all of what they really need to learn without the cooperation of the schools, because the schools tend not to give it. There are always challenges in it, but there's a whole society of parents who are out there. I know about this on the peninsula, and there's this whole group of parents there throughout the region, so from Palo Alto down through Sunnyvale, and obviously it must be in other areas as well, where the parents work with each other. Some parents are equipped to teach the kids, but they all homeschool, but they form groups, so the one parent spends an hour here telling the kids about things that he or she knows very well. Another one takes them out for athletic activities, and so on and so forth. So they coordinate, they bring their own expertise to it. Let me tell you this, that since about 14 years ago, Stanford began admitting homeschooled kids. And they were by far the most interesting group of kids in our classes at that time. So it may be worthwhile to do this.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a public school teacher in a Bay Area district here, and I just wanted to let everyone know that teachers are being enticed through Common Core. We're able to earn extra income by attending classes and doing trainings. We don't have many options within teaching to make extra money. So, of course, you can see how attractive this has been. The other thing is that the machine is just so powerful. Any dissent is just really challenging. I teach kindergarten, and I just saw my Common Core report card. One of the questions under literature was, can my 5-year-old students compare, contrast, and analyze a little reading passage? And the answer is no. We're working on letters and sounds and rhyming, you know. But I wanted to ask on a serious, all of that is serious. I don't mean to say it's not. Would you name the states that have withdrawn or are in the process of withdrawing from Common Core? And secondly, what groups of people have influenced their withdrawal so that the blue state of California could follow suit?
There are about 25 or so states that are trying to actively get out of Common Core. I don't know what is going to happen as a result of the latest election, because that is certainly going to affect the timetable. Some of the bills were obviously there before the election, but there are several new commissioners of education, specifically Oklahoma, I know, and Colorado, where commissioners of education, as Milgram indicated at the very beginning, have committed themselves to an anti-Common Core agenda. But some of these other states are having different kinds of problems working out a stronger set of standards. They want first-class sets of standards. In most cases, they don't want to go back to their old standards because there were problems with most states in their old standards. There were many that had good standards, but a larger number that had poorer standards. So they are trying to figure out how to get committees in place. Remember, the same departments of education that gave them the poor standards are also now, for the most part, supporting Common Core. So you have a problem of where to locate the development of better standards, and I'm trying to advise states for that. As far as what California is trying to do, you probably have to, I think California is behind the curve at this point, as far as I can see. There are states, as I say, like Oklahoma, Ohio, North Dakota, that have active bills that they are considering. South Carolina. No state has yet completely pulled out of Common Core successfully. It was a very carefully thought through plan, and when state boards by statutory authority adopted it, it made it very difficult for state legislatures and governors to overrule what those state boards could by law adopt. And then you have two major congressional bills. No Child Left Behind would need to be wiped out, which is a possibility for the future, and that's something that could be conveyed to your congressional representatives. This is a message that Washington needs to take care of. They've had nothing to do basically with Common Core except support it by the stimulus money sent to the USED. And now you have the waivers that the USED has given to a number of states to waiver them out of the conditions of No Child Left Behind, which locks them in even tighter to Common Core and its tests. So you've got to get rid of the waivers, make sure there's no further money that goes for the support of Common Core because Race to the Top money expired this year, and get rid of No Child Left Behind and basically get the federal government with its guidelines out of state activities in education. That's only the beginning, because you then still have to figure out how to deal with your own state Department of Education, which in most states has not proved to be very effective in what it has been doing to improve or strengthen public education. But California is not one of the leaders let me put it that way, in any of these efforts. It's rather at the very tail end.
Right, and both our candidates for state superintendent were pro Common Core, both of them. I mean, they were like
No choice.
twins.
Right.
Well, I thank you so much. I'm going to introduce briefly just Sally Wood, another one of our mothers. She's going to close it up for us tonight, and we'll go heading out toward the lobby there.
Hello, all. You've done really good. Just, kind of hearing an enormous amount of information. And I hope now that you go home and you do your homework and you do lots of it. And I encourage you to, on the back of the program that we gave you here tonight, our Facebook, our Twitter, the previous forum that we did, to check all that out. And there will be lots of other online information that you'll get. And to remember that you have the opt-out option, and to spread that word around to your friends, because the Common Core works with the testing. It goes hand in hand with that, and there's money in that, and money talks. So if they don't have tests to get data, then they don't have a working system. Let's see here. Our next forum that we hope to host is in February or March, so stay on the Facebook. We'll be advertising it there. And we're going to bring in a neurobehavioral psychologist and a clinical psychologist, and both of them are seeing now the problems that are developing with the standards that are not age appropriate. Their offices are very busy, from that standpoint of view. They're, making a lot of money, but it's really not the best thing for our children to be in this situation. If you have more questions, we're going to have tables in the back, and we will be there. If you have some more questions to ask us or information that you can give us, we're, very much learning from each other. So those are available in the lobby. And let's see here. Just if you have any more money that you would like to put towards these forums, go ahead and do that. We have lots of things that we would like to bring you. We're kind of planning a few forums into the future. Let's see. Thank you. Kevin Snyder, thank you. I mean, how many times you have been in the front lines for us. Thank you for that. Dr. Milgram, thank you for being such an approachable person and excellent mathematician to just kind of make this understandable for us. I appreciate that very much. A wonderful person, Dr. Stotsky, who has just been creating standards for years and years. She could, wallpaper her house with all the committees that she's been on, as all these people can. Thank you very much for taking the time for us. And my good friend, ELISE Cook, that I enjoy very much, who keeps me sharp on issues that are affecting my children and things like data mining and where that can go in the future, and the fact that we need to speak up while we can. I also want to, thank you, Calvary Temple Church, for letting us have this facility. And also, I want to thank you guys, because you took a holiday weekend on a Friday night to come out here and to say that, yes, we are concerned enough about our children and what's happening in the schools to do this. So thank you very much. And I hope very much to see you at our next forum. Thank you. Good night.
I just don't get it intellectually or emotionally. I don't understand it on either of those levels.